Good evening. My name is Evan Gregory, and this is Bible Answers. We're going to be continuing our study in Acts. We're going to be in chapter 5 of this evening, and we're going to be looking at the first half of chapter 5, rather. And so I hope you follow along. Our website's NorthColumbusChristians.com. That is scrolling below me. Also, if you're seeing this right now live, you're seeing this on Facebook, and if not, we will have these videos uploaded on our YouTube page, and that is North Columbus Church of Christ. You can subscribe to that page, and you'll be notified when we have new videos being uploaded. And so, getting straight into the lesson, remember in Acts chapter 4, we see a situation where a lame man is healed, and we see where the Jewish leaders really just don't like this. They don't like the fact that the apostles are ultimately preaching Christ and confirming that message through these miracles. And so we see that, and then at the end of chapter 4, we see where the Christians are selling their possessions in order to help those needy Christians that were amongst them. And so, and that begins and takes us to verse 1 of chapter 5, where we see the story about Ananias and Sapphira. And it says, "But a certain man named Ananias with Sapphira, his wife, sold a possession, and he kept back part of the proceeds, his wife also being aware of it, and brought a certain part and laid it at the apostles' feet. But Peter said, Ananias, why has Satan filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back part of the price of the land for yourself? While it remained, was it not your own? And after it was sold, was it not in your own control? Why have you conceived this thing in your heart? You have not lied to men, but to God." And Ananias, hearing these words, fell down and breathed his last. So great fear came upon all those who heard these things, and the young men arose and wrapped him up, carried him out, and buried him. So again, at the end of chapter 4, we see where Christians were selling their possessions in order to help other Christians. But we see this situation in which these two individuals, Ananias and Sapphira, they're a husband and wife, where they sell a possession here, but yet they keep back part of the proceeds. They're keeping back part of the money. And what we see here is Ananias and Sapphira has set up a scheme. They're lying and say, okay, well, we sold it for X amount of dollars, when in reality they sold it for more, and they're keeping back a portion of it for themselves. And we see the reaction that Peter has to this. He says, "You have lied. You have filled your heart, and Satan has filled your heart to lie to the Holy Spirit and keep back a part of the price of the land for yourself." And he tells them, "This land, after it was sold, or this money after it was sold, was none of your control. You could have kept back a part of the money, all right. But the problem is not that you kept back a part of the money. The problem is that you lied and said this was all this that you have given all of this possession and given it to those that are in need." And we see what happens here, that Ananias dies because of that. Interesting enough, so we see Ananias situation here, and what's interesting about this is, so this is very early in the new covenant, and we see a kind of a similar situation back in Leviticus, where in the early part of giving the old law, that we have a situation with Nadab and Abihu, Aaron's sons, that they're killed because they offer profane fire to the Lord. That's in Leviticus chapter 10. And so we see that very soon after these covenants are established, we see an event in which people, they do something that is sinful, and they are immediately judged for it. And we'll read later on what the result of seeing Ananias and also Sapphira being killed for this, what it does for the Christians. And also think, going back to Leviticus 10 with Nadab and Abihu, and what would have been going through the Israelites' head when they see this soon after they've been given the law, and soon after, really, when they just starting the process of the priesthood, that these individuals are killed. And you can imagine this would have been, I mean, this would have been a shock to all those people that have witnessed it, but it also would have showed the seriousness of serving the Lord and serving Him properly. And I think this is the same message that we see here with Ananias, that he lies to the Holy Spirit, and then ultimately we see him dying, and then we see these men going and burying him. But then in verse 7 through 11, we see where Sapphira comes in later. It says, now it was about 3 hours later when his wife came in, not knowing what had happened. And Peter answered her, tell me whether you sold the land for so much. She said, yes, for so much. Then Peter said to her, how is it that you have agreed to test the Spirit of the Lord? Look, the feet of those who have buried your husband are at the door, and they will carry you out. Then immediately she fell down at his feet and breathed her last. And the young men came in and found her dead, carrying her out, buried her by her husband. So great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. So Sapphira comes in. Peter asks him, I mean, she had the chance to admit that they actually didn't sell the land for as much as they're claiming it. But Peter asked her again, did she sell the land for that much? And she sticks by it. She says, yes, we sold it for this much. And what do we see? We see just like with Ananias, she dies as well. He says, the feet of those who have buried your husband at the door, and they will carry you out. And we see where she falls and breathes her last. But notice, what is the result of witnessing this event? It says, so great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. And again, think about, we may look at that and say, well, this is very harsh. We may in our own mind say, well, God shouldn't have done that, or whatever reasoning we may come up with. But what we do see here is I believe that there was a very clear purpose as to why this needed to happen. Same thing, Leviticus chapter 10, with Nadab and Abihu, that there needed to be a wake-up call. And we see that in the church here. This is great fear came upon all the church and upon all who heard these things. That the things that they do, they don't need, it's not a casual thing. They don't need to be lax about their service towards God. They need to make sure that they do these things properly and with the proper reverence towards God as well. So in 12, verses 12 through 16, it says, and through the hands of the apostles, many signs and wonders were done among the people, and they were all with one accord in Solomon's porch. Yet none of the rest dared join them, but the people esteemed them highly. And believers were increasingly added to the Lord, multitudes of both men and women, so that they brought the sick out into the streets and laid them on beds and couches, that at least the shadow of Peter passing by might fall on some of them. Also, a multitude gathered from the surrounding cities to Jerusalem, bringing sick people and those who were tormented by unclean spirits, and they were all healed. So after this, we see that the apostles, they continue to do signs and wonders. It says that they were all accord in Solomon's porch. I have a slide here what kind of shows Solomon's porch. In the middle of this screen would have been the temple. I don't know, you may be a little small for some of you to read, but in the middle of this, a very tall building, that is the temple. And then there is this outer wall, and you kind of see that it has this outer wall. It has a roof. You can see the the columns there where people could meet up under, and we see that's described as Solomon's porch. And so they were meeting there, and there is some question about this phrase, yet none of the rest dared join them. In my opinion, this is so the apostles and the believers were with one accord, and it seems those that just didn't believe, maybe the Jews that were around there, they esteemed them highly, but they were kind of standing off, right? They didn't want to, that you could you could understand with what had just happened with Ananias and Sapphira that they uh, might not just want to get all up into the mix with them. But there are some that hold to the view that this all the all with one accord, the all is reference to the apostles, and that the apostles with one accord in Solomon's porch, and then the Christians kind of stood off from amongst the apostles. And of course, people will make that argument looking at the grammar and how that is constructed. But again, that doesn't, at least to me, it doesn't really make sense with how we see the believers. When we see these individuals that believed in the apostles' ability to do these miracles, that they were wanting to be near them to the point where they were at least just have the shadow of Peter passing by on him. So it seems more likely to me that the rest is the Jews or those that were around that wasn't a Christian, but they did have a favorable view of those individuals. I'm getting tongue tied here. And so, anyways, we see where they're continuing to do miracles, and yet these believers were increasing added to the Lord. So they're doing these miracles. The gospel is getting out. People are believing these things, and we see it's to the point where people are coming out from all around, going to Jerusalem, bringing their sick people. You know, even those it says that they were tormented by unclean spirits. We see with Jesus these demons, these unclean spirits that Jesus was able to put out, and even the disciples as well. And we see this continuing on, and we see where they are healing all of these individuals. And again, think about the purpose of these, that ultimately the purpose of the apostles is to preach the gospel, not to heal people, but the healing and the miracles confirms the word of what they have been preaching. That's Hebrews 2 verses 3 and 4, that this was God bearing witness to the message that is being preached. And so that is why we see the apostles continuing to perform these miracles. So moving on to verses 17 through 21, it says, Then the high priest rose up, and all those who were with him, which is the sect of the Sadducees, they were filled with indignation, and laid their hands on the apostles and put them into common prison. But at night an angel of the Lord opened the prison doors and brought them out and said, Go stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. And when they heard that, they entered the temple early in the morning and taught. But the high priest and those with him came and called the council together with all the elders of the children of Israel and sent to the prison to have them brought. And so, just like we see in earlier chapters of Acts, that the Jewish leaders have an extreme issue, to say it lightly, with Peter and the other apostles and what they are preaching, and you could understand why. That they are preaching Christ, they are preaching that the Jews, the Roman leaders the Roman leaders played a part in crucifying this Christ. You know, blaming them, calling them murderers. And so again, we see in this case, the high priest and the Sadducees says they were filled with indignation, and then they throw the apostles in the prison. But notice what we see here. We see a miracle occurring here, that an angel of the Lord comes and lets them out of the prison. And notice what he tells them to do. He doesn't tell them to go and run away and hide, wait for a better time. He tells them to go basically back to what you were doing previously. Go back to work, go stand in the temple and speak to the people all the words of this life. That this was the most necessary thing to be occurring at that moment for them to be preaching that gospel. And then we see that they enter the temple in the morning, and then we see at the end of 21 that, of course, the priests, those they think that they're still in the prison, they go send to the prison to have them brought. And what they'll see, which we'll see next week, is that they are going to be in for a surprise because they're not going to be in the prison. And so, again, this ends our study for tonight. If you have a question or a comment, feel free to leave that. We're going to be finishing up, Lord willing, chapter 5 next Sunday, same time, same place. Again, we upload these exact videos on our YouTube page. It's North Columbus Church of Christ. But until next time, I hope that you all have a good rest of the evening and a good rest of the week. Thanks.